Are you ready?
It's gonna be a hot girl disco summer. I'm never doing that again. I apologize. Why did I do that? Why did I do that? Here, let's fix it. Something cool. What is happening, ladies and gentlemen? It's your boy BDE coming to you with a fantastic week 6 tight end start sit video. We're going to cover all the tight ends in every single one of the 15 games that we have on the week 6 docket. We're going to cover start sits. We're going to talk about fantastic betting props, some DFS tertiary options, the DFS tight ends worth paying up on, and we're going to hit you guys with some juicy betting lines. As always, shout out to our sponsors, Drafters Fantasy. Sign up on Drafters Fantasy. Use promo code DISCO to double your first deposit, dollar for dollar, up to $100. Shout out to our sponsors, Bettor Vision and Bull Rush, and shout out to my business partner, Sleez. We got a fantastic premium Discord and Patreon called TheGuyzFF. It is one of the fastest growing fantasy football communities where we give everybody top-notch fantasy football advice. So without further ado, let's get into the first game, Thursday Night Football kickoff. We got the Philadelphia Eagles and Dallas Goedert against Theo Johnson, who is ascending, but this is not the matchup that we love him. Thursday Night Football kickoff. The game kicks off in New York. Philadelphia is favored by 7 points. Over under is 40.5. So let's talk about where it's advantageous. And it's not very advantageous for Theo Johnson because the Philadelphia Eagles allowed the 29th most fantasy points per game. So one of the least fantasy points per game, 5.9 PPR format. And everything we talk about is PPR format, by the way. 2 opposing tight ends. So we don't love Theo Johnson this week. New York Giants, on the other hand, allowed the 24th most fantasy points at 7.6 and tied for 12th most receptions at 5. The only reason why we like Dallas Goedert is because amongst all Jalen Hurts receiving targets and options, he has been the most reliable. So based off of the tier list here, and we're going to do a tier list for every game here, we got Dallas Goedert in the B tier, and then Theo Johnson's a sit. Next game kicking off in London, England. I said I wasn't going to do the accent, but we did it. Game kicks off at 9:30 a.m. Eastern time. The Denver Broncos are favored by 7 points. To over under is 43.5. And let's talk about where this is advantageous for both tight ends. Let's talk about the Denver Broncos defense and what they allow. So far, the 25th most points to tight ends, 7.5. But we kind of like Mason Taylor in this matchup simply because he's been the wide receiver too when Justin Fields drops back and throws. But we also don't love him. He's not somebody who we're beating the drum about. But they allow the 7th most yards per reception. So we do like the over on his longest reception. Once again, use promo code DISCO to double your first deposit. If you hit 2 props correctly, you get to 3x your money. All the way up to 8 props correctly, you get to 100x your money. Now, New York Jets is one of the most advantageous teams to take advantage of when you have a tight end. Evan Ingram is a definitive start. Why? Because the Jets allow the 9th most fantasy points per game, 12.7 to opposing tight ends, the 10th most receptions at 5.4, and the most receiving TDs allowed on a per game basis at an average of 1. So when we're talking about tiers here, we jumped the gun. When we're talking about tiers here, we're going to put Evan Ingram in the A tier because Sean Payton hates your fantasy football teams, and we're going to put Mason Taylor in the startable C tier. Next game, we got the Arizona Cardinals, who are 7-point dogs coming into Indianapolis. Over under is 47, and we love the high, juicy implied point totals. So let's talk about where it's advantageous, and this is a good matchup for both tight ends, and I like both of these tight ends a lot in this game. Arizona allows the 14th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends at 11.4, so we love Tyler Warren there. The 4th most receptions per game, 2 tight ends at 6.8, so we love the over on his receptions prop. The 5th most receiving yards per game at 67.60, so that's a lot of receiving yards there, so we like him in that department in those props, and we also like him as a definitive start. Indianapolis, on the other hand, they allow the 22nd most points per game, but tied for 10th most receptions allowed at 5.4. They allow 9 fantasy points per game. So when we're looking at the tiers here, they're both in the S tier. They're both fantastic tight ends here. They're both top 5 tight ends, and you must start them. Next game, we got the Cleveland Browns and the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I know it could be David Njoku or Harold Fannin, and I know it could be Jonnu Smith or Pat Freiermuth or even Darnell Washington or the shittier Hayward brother, whatever his first name is. The Browns are 5.5-point dogs. Over under is 38, and Let's talk about where it's advantageous. Cleveland allows the 21st most fantasy points to tight ends at 9.7, but tied for 4th most TDs allowed. And there's a huge cluster of teams that allow 0.6 touchdowns per game to tight ends. Pittsburgh, on the other hand, is a fantastic matchup. They allow the 4th most fantasy points per game to tight ends at 13.4. This is the Steelers. The 11th most receptions to tight ends at 5.25, 10th most receiving yards per game to 62.50, 6th most yards allowed per game at 11 yard per reception at 11.90, and 3rd most TDs at 0.75. So more often than not, tight ends are finding the end zone against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So when we're looking at the tiers here, we're going to put David Njoku in the A tier. He should be in the S tier, but Fannin is taking away some of his production. And Jonnu Smith and both Pat Freiermuth are definitive sits in the E tier. And I would say Fannin, based off of the reliability and the usage that he's gotten, even though the splits weren't fantastic and the targets weren't fantastic, he still found the end zone. He still has the end zone upside, and he still has 50% snaps within the Dylan Gabriel system and situation there. So we do like Harold Fannin. He's going to be in the C tier. Next game, we got the Dallas Cowboys and Jake Ferguson visiting the Carolina Panthers. The Cowboys are favored by 3 points. The over-under is 49.5. This is one of the highest implied point totals. So let's talk about why we like. And when we say Tommy Tremble, it could be Jatavian Sanders. Right now, he's questionable, so there's a chance that he could play. Dallas allows the 11th most fantasy points per game to tight ends, PPR format, 11.8 in that department. Sorry, allergies. 5th most receptions allowed per game, 6.60, and the 12th most receiving yards at 55.40. Carolina is one of the most advantageous matchups for tight ends, and Darren Waller just ate them apart in the first half last week, and I think Ferguson's in line for tight end 1 week. He is my tight end 1 of the week. Carolina allows the 2nd most fantasy points per game to tight ends at 14.8, 7th most receptions allowed at 6.40, the most receiving yards by far allowed to tight ends at 80.20, so we love the over on Jake Ferguson's receiving yards, the 3rd most yards allowed per reception at 12.53, so we also like the longest reception prop as well, and tied for 4th most touchdowns allowed, once again in that cluster at 0.60. So when we're looking at tiers here, Tommy Tremble would be in the E tier. If Jatavian Sanders plays, he'd be in the D tier, like not bad for DFS. I think Tremble would be decent for DFS as well, but not something I'm going to be highly owned on. And Jake Ferguson is in the S tier because he's him. He's the guy. He's been the best tight end in football, and this is one of the best tight end matchups for tight end in football. Let's talk about game 6. We got the Los Angeles Chargers visiting the Miami Dolphins. The Chargers are 4-point favorites. The over-under is 43.5, so not a fantastic implied point total. It's not advantageous for Darren Waller, and Darren Waller is not somebody I'm recommending to start. The Chargers allow the 27th most fantasy points per game to tight ends. He is going to be touchdown dependent, and the touchdowns have been there since he's been in the lineup, but I cannot recommend starting him. But the usage and upsides there, so I understand if you do. Miami versus tight ends, though, is very advantageous, and it's a fantastic matchup for Rondé Gadsden. And I think that Gadsden's going to be one of the higher owned, for me personally, DFS tight ends. Can't recommend starting him, but I do like him in DFS. The Dolphins allow the 8th most fantasy points per game to tight ends. This is why I kind of like him as a DFS option. 12.8, tied for 10th most receptions allowed per game, 5.4. 8th most receiving yards per game, 64.80. 5th most yards per reception at 12. And 4th most TDs allowed per game at 0.6, once again within that cluster. So when we're looking at the tiers here, we're going to put Darren Waller in the C tier, and we're going to put Gadsden in the D tier. D for DFS, C for like he's startable, but very touchdown dependent. We don't like to bet on touchdown dependency. All right, next game, we've got the Los Angeles Rams visiting the Baltimore Ravens, and the Rams are only 7.5-point favorites in this game. The over-under is 44.5, and I think the reason why they're 7.5-point favorites in this game is simply because there is the possibility that Lamar Jackson could play, but if Lamar Jackson doesn't play, a lot of things are subject to change here. So Rams versus the tight end, they allow the 15th most fantasy points per game, 11.3. 10th most receptions allowed per game, 5.4. 15th most receiving yards allowed per game at 49.20. So this is a good, decent area and spot for Mark Andrews, but it could also be Isaiah Likely. Baltimore, on the other hand, is a fantastic matchup for tight ends, but I just hate Tyler Higbee, so I think the production is not going to go to him. 12th in fantasy points per game, 2 opposing tight ends, 11.7. 4th most receptions allowed per game, 6.8. 3rd most receiving yards allowed per game, 7.1 yards, and 8th most yards per reception. So when we're looking at the tiers here, we're going to put Mark Andrews just based off of the matchup and the potential usage with Cooper Rush, and we know they're going to have to air it out in the B tier, and we're going to put Higbee in a definitive sit. Next game, we got my New England Patriots versus the New Orleans Saints. The Patriots are 3.5-point favorites. So over under is 46. So it's not a bad implied point total, not decent, but this is a fantastic matchup for both tight ends. So let's talk about where this is advantageous for Juwan Johnson, who a lot of you have given up hope on. I have not thus far, and this is going to be his kind of last hurrah. The Patriots allowed the 7th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, 13 fantasy points per game. The 8th most receptions at 6.2, the 2nd most receiving yards at 75, and the 4th most yards allowed per reception. So we like Juwan Johnson's receiving yards. We like his longest reception as well in this game. New Orleans, and after last week, I literally tweeted this out. I said, start tight ends against the Saints, and we're definitely starting Hunter Henry as well. They allow the 6th most fantasy points per game to tight ends, 13.3, the 9th most receptions allowed per game at 5.6, the 11th most receiving yards at 56.60, 12th most yards per reception at 10.11, but they're tied for allowing the 2nd most receiving touchdowns, and we do like Mr. Hunter Henry for anytime touchdown at 0.80. So when we're looking at the tiers here, we're going to put Hunter Henry just based off of the usage, and he should be in the S tier, but we're just going to put him in the A tier here because this game could be a ground heavy game. His floor is 13 points this week. His ceiling is God knows what. And we're going to put Juwan Johnson in the B tier. He could be an S tier tight end this week, but we have to see it to believe it. Once again, this is the last time we're going to trust and recommend Juwan Johnson. So I apologize if this recommendation of starting him is wrong, but the matchup is just too juicy. Speaking of juicy matchups, this is a fantastic matchup. We got the Seattle Seahawks versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Seahawks are 1-point underdogs visiting Jacksonville. The over-under is 47.5. We like the high implied point total. Let's talk about where this is advantageous for Brenton Strange. And I will caveat this. Brenton Strange did leave the game early on Monday Night Football against the Kansas City Chiefs, so he may not play. And I'm not recommending his backup because I don't even know his fucking backup's name. So let's talk about where it's advantageous. The Seahawks allowed the 3rd most fantasy points per game to tight ends, the 13.8, the 3rd most receptions at 7 per game, the 9th most receiving yards per game, 62.60, and they're in that cluster of the 4th most TDs allowed at 0.60. The Jacksonville Jaguars, not the most advantageous, but Barner has been a touchdown monster. I'm not recommending him, but he has been really good. They allow the Jags allow the 20th most fantasy points per game, 9.9 to tight ends, the 10th most receptions at 5.4, and the 13th most receiving yards at 52. So when we're looking at the tiers here, we're going to put Mr. Strange in the C tier. He's startable if he's healthy because it's a plus matchup and a fantastic matchup. And I wouldn't hate using him in DFS. And then we're going to put Barner in a D tier. It's a decent matchup, but it's just tough to project him moving forward. Next game, don't really want to talk about it, but we have to because that's what you guys are here for. We got the Tennessee Titans coming off of their lone victory against the Las Vegas Raiders, who just got absolutely dummied by the Indianapolis Colts. The Titans are 4.5-point dogs. Over under is 41.5. It's not advantageous at all for Brock Bowers, and he's coming off of an injury. Should he play? We still don't know if he's going to play. But if he does play, he's a must start because of the draft capital you spent. Tennessee allows the 23rd most fantasy points per game to tight ends, 7.6, and 12th most receptions are tied in that department for 5 per game. Las Vegas allows the 26th most fantasy points per game to tight ends at 7, but 2nd most yards per reception to tight ends at 13.19. So we do kind of like the over on Chigozie Mukonku's longest reception. Brock Bowers is going to be in the A tier. Chig is going to be in the D tier. Let's talk about the next game. And my tight end one on the week is in this game, and it's not Mike Gesicki. Shocker. So Joe Flacco, prior to recording this, just got confirmed on Twitter, as per Adam Schefter and everybody else who reports news. Joe Flacco is going to start. And this is a fantastic matchup for Mike Gesicki, but he's not fantastic. So the Bengals are 14-point dogs. Over under is 44.5. Let's talk about where this is advantageous for my tight end one of the week, which is Tucker Kraft. The Bengals allow the most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends at 15.2. We just saw Sam Laporta absolutely demolish them. Even Evan Ingram looked like he could have potentially gone for a nuke outing. He was just coming off of an injury the week prior. The Bengals allow, they're tied for 4th most receptions allowed per game to tight ends, so we like the over on his receptions prop at 6.80. 4th most receiving yards per game at 69. So we like the over on the receiving yards. I don't know why I said it like that. 10th most yards per reception, 10.15, and tied for 2nd most touchdowns per game. So we also like Tucker Kraft for an anytime touchdown. They allow 0.8 touchdowns per game. On the other side, it's a fantastic matchup for Mike Gesicki, but Mike Gesicki, like I alluded to earlier, sucks. He's terrible. But we know that the tight ends get a lot of usage in a Joe Flacco offense. So we'll see. It could be Noah Fant. It could be Mike Gesicki. Don't love him. Don't love them, but we're going to tell you why it's advantageous and why you might be shocked to see one of these guys as a top 15 tight end this week. They allow the Packers allow the fifth most fantasy points per game to tight ends at 13.3, the most receptions per game at 7.5, and the sixth most receiving yards at 65.5. So when we're looking at the tiers here for these two tight ends, we're going to put Tucker Kraft where he deserves to be in the S tier, and we're going to put Mike Gesicki in the D tier just because the matchup is so juicy, but we're not recommending him anywhere. All right, next game, we got the San Francisco 49ers, who are 3-point dogs coming into Tampa Bay. The over-under is 47.5. We like the high implied point total. We'll talk about where this is advantageous. San Francisco versus the tight ends allows the 17th most fantasy points per game, 10.9. The tied for 10th most receptions at 5.4, and in that cluster of 0.6 touchdowns allowed per game, fourth most advantageous. So there's touchdown upside for Mr. Cade Otton this week against San Fran. And there's also a touchdown upside for Cade Otton because the Buccaneers are allowed tied for second most receiving touchdowns to tight ends at 0.8. They allow the 10th most fantasy points per game at 11.9 and tied for 10th most receptions at 5.4. So when we're looking at the tiers here, we're going to put Cade Otton in the C tier, and we're going to put Tongs in like a DFS D tier here. I'm not very high on both of them, but like there's decent upside in that matchup, like we alluded to. Sunday Night Football, I love both of these tight ends, and I love this game. The Lions are now 2.5-point dogs. The over-under is the highest implied point total. It's 52.5. So let's talk about where it's advantageous. The Detroit Lions versus tight ends are 19th in fantasy points allowed per game at 10. They allow the 11th most yards per reception at 10.14, and in that cluster of 0.6 touchdowns allowed per game, fourth most. And then KC is just 30th in fantasy points per game allowed to tight ends at 5.1. It's not fantastic, but because it's a high implied point total, we're going to be bullish on both of these guys and put them both in the A tier. Definite must starts. Let's talk about the first game of Monday Night Football. Game kicks off at 7:15 p.m. Eastern time in Atlanta. The Bills are 4.5-point favorites, and the over-under is 49.5, tied for second highest implied point total. So let's talk about where we're happy in this matchup and we're not. Like we don't love this matchup for either tight end, but the high implied point total kind of makes us like it. But let's talk about why it's not advantageous. These teams are literally the worst two matchups for tight ends. Buffalo allows the 31st most fantasy points per game, so the second least, 4.6, and the ninth most yards per reception, 10.27. So we're inclined to kind of, not be very bullish, but if it's advantageous, it's advantageous. So the longest reception for Kyle Pitts is definitely in play. Atlanta versus tight ends is the worst matchup for tight ends. They allow 3.2 fantasy points per game. So when we're looking at tiers here, just based off of the game script, we're going to put Dalton Kincaid, who has been ascending and continues to be a very, very good talent. We're going to put him in the B tier, and we're going to put Kyle Pitts in the C tier simply because it's a high implied point total, and we like the matchup here. Last game on the docket. This is a good game for tight ends, okay? So we got the second game of Monday Night Football. This game kicks off at 8:15 p.m. Eastern time. The Bears are 4.5-point dogs. The over-under is 49.5, tied for second highest implied point total. Let's talk about where this is advantageous for Zach Ertz and his fellow tight ends. The Bears allow the 18th most fantasy points per game to tight ends, 10.3, but the second most receptions allowed per game. Hello, this is well within what Zach Ertz does at 7.25, and the 14th most receiving yards allowed per game at 51.75. Washington versus tight ends. They allow the 13th most fantasy points per game. So we got Colt Kmet here because we don't know if Loveland's going to start. And even if Loveland starts, we don't love him. They allow the 7th most receiving yards per game at 65.40. I don't remember if I said how many fantasy points Washington allows. They allow 11.5 if I didn't. And by far, they allow the most yards per reception to opposing tight ends at 14.89. So we like the over on the longest reception for Colt Kmet at 9.5. So when we're talking about tiers here, we're going to put Mr. Kmet in the D tier. We don't recommend starting him, and Zach Ertz is a definitive start because even though the usage wasn't spectacular this past week against the Los Angeles Chargers, he is still one of the favorite, more reliable targets for that guy, Jaden Daniels. Now, guys, that's going to conclude all of our start sits. If you guys want to watch our wide receivers, quarterbacks, or running backs video, they're all posted above. Shout out to you guys for tuning in. If you guys like the video, smash the freaking like button. Appreciate you guys. Subscribe if you haven't. Once again, guys, take your fantasy football just ability to the next level. by joining one of the greatest fantasy football communities. It's growing on a daily basis. We are topping out on members, and we're going to welcome all newcomers. It's very affordable. The Guys FF partnered with my guy Sleez. Shout out to our sponsors, Drafters Fantasy. Use promo code DISCO to double your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. Shout out to our sponsors, Bull Rush, and shout out to our sponsors, Bettor Vision. There's no better place to sweat your DFS lineups, your best ball lineups, your fantasy football lineups, and all of your betting props in one spot. You don't have to have 16 apps open. It's a free download. Just download the Bettor Vision app. All links are in the description, guys. We're going to be live before the Thursday night football game at 7 p.m. Eastern time, where I'll be joined by my co-host with the most Sleez bomb. We're going to be taking some start-sit questions, answering any and all of them. We're going to be live covering the remaining 14 games on the slate Saturday night at 7 p.m. Eastern time, also with Sleez bomb. Good luck this week, guys. Make sure you guys set your alarm before the 9:30 a.m. kickoff in London. And I'm going to stop talking now. I appreciate you guys. Remember, like the video. And if you guys want to watch the wide receiver, running back, or quarterback video, just click one of these videos here. Time for the greatest outro in fantasy football. Peace.